All right, so let's recap a little bit of what we've talked about so far. Just to recap, when we're writing, you have 4 equally important but non-identical parts. Your soprano, your alto, your tenor, and bass. They don't cross over each other. They have to be in that order, but they can meet each other. The soprano, they can share a pitch. Your soprano and alto can share a pitch. Your alto and tenor can share a pitch. Your tenor and bass can share a pitch, but they can never cross to where the alto is higher than the soprano, or the tenor is higher than the alto, or the bass is higher than the tenor, etc. Your soprano is primarily conjunct. Your bass is much more likely to be disjunct than any other part. Your alto and tenor, more fluid, very conjunct or static the whole time. When we write our outer parts, we want to try to have them be contrary whenever possible. And those inner parts are going to be a little bit more static. They'll be moving obliquely, similarly contrary to the other parts. When you're looking at your types of motion, you want to avoid parallel perfect fifths and parallel perfect octaves between any parts, not just outer parts, between any parts. And that goes for, let's say they're an octave apart and then they both leap and they're still an octave apart. That's not parallel, that's called contrary octaves, but we still want to avoid that for the same reason, because it destroys the 4-part texture that we have. Remember that for spacing, your soprano and alto have to be within an octave of each other, equal to or less than an octave. Your alto and tenor have to be within an octave of each other, equal or less. Tenor and bass, put them however far apart that you want, as long as you obey the ranges, right? 2 octaves is pretty much the edge of their ranges. You want to keep them there. And talking about ranges, we mentioned that you don't want to always put everyone at the maximum of their ranges, right? Those are your choices, but what instrument sounds better at the absolute extent of its range than it does in the middle? None. None of them do. They always sound better in the core part of their range. So you want to aim for that. That means that your alto and tenor are going to be kind of on the edges of the staff here. Your soprano is going to be about the middle, but then the bass can pretty much have play throughout the entire staff. Okay, let's talk about our process. Number 1, analyze, aka look at what you've got. What do we have here? We've got a grand staff. We're in the key of
D minor.
D minor. We're in 3/4, and we have a figured bass line. Figured bass line tells us a lot about the music that's coming up. Because we have a figured bass line, we can analyze these chords. And you got a pretty simple progression this time, right?
And they're all minor ones.
They're all minor ones. We've got a 1, a 1/6, a 1/6/4, a 1, a 1/6/4, a 1/6, and a 1. Now, it might help you to go ahead and put your note choices. What are my note choices for my 1 chord? D, F, A. Now, which one is my top priority for me to try to double?
D.
I want to try to double D whenever possible. What about if I can't double D, or if it's going to give me problems if I do? A. Now, we've talked about this before, but I'll say it again. In 6/4 chords, it's extremely common to double the 5th. So that's sort of the exception to our doubling rule. If it's a 6/4 chord, make the 5th your top priority, because often a 1/6/4, especially a 1/6/4, isn't going to even act like a 1. It'll act like a 5, because the 5 is in the bass. If we double that 5th, it really makes it act like a 5. It really pushes that stronger in that direction, which is a good thing. Normally we want chords to act like themselves, but there's a few times that we want chords to act like other things, and our 1/6/4 is almost always in that case. Okay, so step 1, analyze what you've got. Great. Step 2. Find note choices. Some people like to put this separately. Some people like to just think about it. We already wrote them down. Step 3. Write a great melody. I don't mean an okay melody. I mean a great melody. Now, your choices here are incredibly limited, so I respect that. But by and large, when you're writing, you really want to spend time on the melody. The melody is going to be your hook. Think of a classical piece that you really like. What comes to mind? The melody. So that's really where you want to spend your time. Okay? So, what are our choices to start with? D or A or F. Now, remember, we're not worrying so much about doubling at this point because all of those are fair game, right? Doubling is really when we look at the, oh, what's left? What do I need to try to fill in the gaps? So we can start on any of those. Now, what's the other thing to think about with outer voices? Contrary motion. So look at the shape of my bass line, and let's write a soprano line that meets that. First things first, we'll sing our bass. La, ready, go. La, do, mi, la, mi, do, la. So it goes up, down, and a little up, down at the end. What should our soprano do?
Go down.
Down, up, and whatever at the end. Maybe a little up, maybe a little down, maybe whatever. So, where do we start?
What high A? Or D? Or D? Yeah, D. Let's do
D? I think D is a good choice.
Tonic. First note.
Because we're going to have two parts that share the same staff, your stems are going to be pointed differently on each staff. The bass will always be stems down, the alto will always be stems down, tenor and soprano will always be up. Moving on, what's our next note?
So it's a note. F.
What are our choices, I mean, for our soprano?
D, F, or A.
D, F, or A. Now, there's an F there, that's a third. We probably don't want to double that. So,
How about we go down
to
A?
A.
Sure.
Sing our fledgling melody so far. La, mi. Now what? Got a 1-6-4 here?
Oh, so 5, right?
Yeah, so we can double the fifth. La, mi. Mi again. Now what?
How about an A? How about Oh, I mean,
An F?
yeah, well, or we could.
So far we've got contrary and oblique. We haven't done a lot of similar, so if you want to do a similar, we can. We should just try to avoid it.
Oh, okay. Then
So like, if we do a similar here, the next one shouldn't also be similar. Up to D?
Yes.
Here's where we're running into problems.
Because.
Octave apart, octave apart.
Ooh.
Oof.
Notice that.
So now we know we pretty much have to go to F, right? That's okay. Similar motion's not a bad thing. It's just excessive similar motion is bad. Sing our melody so far. La, mi, mi, do. I like it so far. Let's finish it up.
That's an A at the bottom. How about an F?
Another F.
Or, wait, we could double the A.
We could double the A. Yeah. Here we go. La, mi, mi, do, mi. I think that works. Now what?
F at the bottom.
It's an F, so we probably don't want an F there.
We could do a low D. Yeah, D, low D.
Okay?
That's what I was thinking.
That's kind of a big jump. Remember that we're going to have to fit a tenor and an alto in between those two.
Oh, okay.
High D? It's extremely important that you sing your melody as you're writing it. Do not rely on the piano. It's a percussion instrument. It will not serve you. It's very important you sing your melody. Sing it. La, mi, do, mi, la. La again. Sing the whole thing. Ready, go. La, mi, do, mi, la, la. Again with our bass line. Here we go. La, mi, do, mi, la, la. You know, I think that works out pretty well. And then, if you spend your time in your melody, the tenor and alto should just spit right out. What notes do we have left? We've got a D and a D. Don't want to put the tenor bass too close. Put a little space there. F, A. How about the next chord? We've got an F and an A.
So
D. And keep the A, right? We want to keep it the same whenever possible because it maintains the stability of the inner parts. Next chord. We've got two A's.
D and an F.
So we need a D and an F. One possibility.
D for tenor.
D for tenor. And A for alto, or F for alto. Next chord. You ask yourself, what do you have? What do you need? What do you have?
D and F, so A and D.
So A and D. Next chord. What do you have? What do you need?
So A and A.
A and A. So you need a D and an F.
We have F and D.
You have it in?
A and
And then what do you have? What do you need?
D and D, we need F.
D or A? Oh, wait.
Okay, so my only problem is that our inner parts are a little too disjunct. So now we're going to have to go through and double notes that we otherwise wouldn't double for the purpose of smoothing those inner voices out. It's pretty easy. You can probably do that on your own. If you want to stick around, it'll take me about 60 seconds, and I'll show you to do it here. But you're free to go if you need to. See ya.
Thanks, Mr. D.
No problem.
Happy birthday, Colin.
Thanks, Isla.
In this case,
Thank you.
I'm going to choose to omit the fifth of a root position triad, which we talked last week. We can omit the fifth of a root position triad and double the third. Because now, look what that's going to do to my alto and my tenor lines. Here, I'm going to choose to omit the fifth and double the third. Because look at what that does to my alto and tenor lines. And here, I'm going to choose to omit the fifth and double the third. Because look at what that does to my alto and tenor lines. I took what was two very disjunct alto and tenor line parts, and now they each only have one or two leaps.
Can we hear it?
Sure, let's hear it. So the last three beats go. And that's the basic idea of part writing.
It's funny how it sounds like